My name is Sofia Martinez, and for 15 years, I believed that love meant making yourself smaller so someone else could shine brighter. It took losing everything I thought I wanted to realize I'd been living someone else's dream all along. The story starts in 2008, when I was 26 and working as a financial analyst at a mid-sized investment firm in downtown Seattle. I graduated summa cum laude from University of Washington with a double major in finance and economics, landed this job straight out of college, and spent 4 years climbing the ladder with the methodical precision my immigrant parents had drilled into me. Mija, in this country, you have to work twice as hard to get half as much, my father would say, his hands still smelling of engine oil from his job at the auto shop. But if you're smart, if you're careful with money, you can build something they can never take away. I live by those words. I saved 60% of my salary, lived in a studio apartment that barely fit a bed, and brown-bagged lunch every single day. By 26, I'd saved $180,000, a fortune by my family's standards, a down payment on the American dream my parents had sacrificed everything to give me. That's when I met Marcus Thompson. Marcus was everything I wasn't, confident where I was cautious, charismatic where I was quietly competent, born into the kind of old Seattle money that opened doors before you even knew they existed. His family owned Thompson and Associates, a boutique consulting firm that had been advising tech startups since the 80s. Marcus had an MBA from Wharton, a trust fund, and the kind of easy charm that made everyone in a room want to be his friend. He was also the most beautiful man I'd ever seen in person. We met at a networking event for young professionals, one of those awkward mixers where everyone pretended to care about each other's elevator pitches while scanning the room for better opportunities. I was nursing a cheap white wine in the corner, mentally calculating how much longer I had to stay to justify the $20 entrance fee, when he appeared beside me. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, and his smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "Is it that obvious?" I asked, surprised by my own boldness. "Only to someone who feels the same way. I'm Marcus." Sofia. We talked for 3 hours. About books, about travel, about our dreams for the future. Marcus wanted to break away from his family's traditional consulting model to focus on helping innovative startups scale their operations. He had vision, passion, and ideas that made my analytical mind spin with possibilities. "The problem is capital," he said as the event wound down around us. "I've got the connections, the expertise, but my trust fund won't unlock until I'm 30. By then, all the best opportunities will be gone." I should have recognized it as a red flag, the way he casually mentioned his trust fund, the assumption that money was just a temporary inconvenience rather than something you earn through sacrifice. But I was 26 and in love for the first time in my life, and Marcus Thompson made me feel like I was part of something bigger than myself. We dated for 8 months. Marcus would pick me up in his BMW, take me to restaurants where the wine cost more than my weekly grocery budget, introduce me to his friends from prep school and business school. I felt like Cinderella, constantly amazed that someone like him had chosen someone like me. "You're different from the other women I've dated," he told me one evening as we walked along the waterfront. "You're real. Grounded. You understand what it means to work for something." I glowed under his praise, not recognizing the subtle condescension woven through the compliment. Marcus's family accepted me with polite bewilderment. His mother, Patricia, was all pearls and passive aggression. "How lovely that you're so practical, dear," she said the first time we met, her eyes taking in my discount store dress with barely concealed horror. Marcus has always been attracted to authentic people. His father, Richard, was more direct. "What is it you do again, Sarah?" he asked over dinner at their Bellevue mansion. "Sofia," Marcus corrected gently. "She's a financial analyst at Morrison & Partners." "Ah," Richard said, as if that explained everything. "Well, that's nice." The subtext was clear. I was a phase, a bit of rough that Marcus would eventually outgrow once he came to his senses and married someone from his own social stratum. But Marcus seemed genuinely smitten. He introduced me to his business dreams with the enthusiasm of a kid showing off a favorite toy. "Look at these projections," he said one evening, spreading papers across my tiny kitchen table. If I could just get the seed funding to start Thompson Innovation Consulting, we could capture 30% of the startup consulting market in Seattle within 2 years. I studied his business plan with professional interest. It was good, better than good. Marcus had identified a genuine gap in the market, developed innovative solutions, and created realistic growth projections. The only thing standing between him and success was $200,000 in startup capital. $200,000. $20,000 more than I had sitting in my savings account. This is brilliant, Marcus, I said, meaning it. Have you tried traditional business loans? He laughed, but it sounded bitter. Banks don't loan money to ideas, Sophia. They loan money to collateral. And my trust fund is tied up in so many legal restrictions that I can't use it as security. What about your parents? They want me to join the family firm, do things their way. They think my ideas are too risky, too modern. He ran his hands through his perfectly styled hair. They don't understand that the business world is changing. That you have to innovate or die. I watched him struggle with frustration and felt something shift in my chest. This wasn't just about money, it was about Marcus breaking free from family expectations, proving himself as his own man. It was about believing in someone's dreams when no one else would. That night, lying in my narrow bed with Marcus sleeping beside me, I stared at the ceiling and did something that would change the course of my entire life. I decided to believe in us. The next morning, I made breakfast while Marcus showered, my hands shaking as I rehearsed the words. Marcus, I said when he emerged, toweling his hair, I want to talk to you about your business plan. Sophia, we don't have to keep discussing it. I know it's not really your thing. I want to invest, I interrupted. He froze, the towel halfway to his head. What? I have money saved. Enough to fund your startup. I want to invest in Thompson Innovation Consulting. Marcus stared at me like I'd announced my intention to sprout wings and fly. Sophia, you can't be serious. How much money are we talking about? $180,000. Almost everything I have. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus sank into the chair across from me, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that looked like calculation. You have almost $200,000? He asked finally. I've been saving since I was 16. Working summers, living below my means, investing carefully. I felt defensive, like I needed to justify my frugality. My parents taught me to always have a safety net. And you'd risk it all on my business? I'd risk it all on us, I corrected. On our future. That's when Marcus did something that should have warned me about the man I was falling in love with. Instead of asking about partnership structures, instead of discussing what my investment would entitle me to, instead of treating me like a serious business partner, he got up, pulled me into his arms, and kissed me like I was the answer to all his prayers. Sophia Martinez, he whispered against my lips, you are the most incredible woman I've ever met. I melted into his embrace, dizzy with love and the intoxicating feeling that I was about to change both our lives forever. 3 weeks later, I handed Marcus a cashier's check for $180,000. We were in his apartment, a sleek downtown loft that cost more per month than I made in 3, celebrating with champagne that probably cost more than my monthly rent. To Thompson Innovation Consulting, Marcus said, raising his glass. And to the woman who made it all possible. To our future, I countered, clinking my glass against his. Marcus's kiss tasted like champagne and promises. What I didn't know then was that Marcus had already registered the business 2 days earlier, in his name only. What I didn't know was that the legal documents I'd signed, the ones he'd assured me were just formalities, essentially made me a silent investor with no ownership stake and no voting rights. What I didn't know was that I'd just funded my own marginalization, bought and paid for the privilege of watching someone else live my dream. But I would learn all of that soon enough. 6 months later, Thompson Innovation Consulting landed its first major client, a biotech startup that needed help scaling from 10 employees to 50. The contract was worth $400,000 over 18 months, and Marcus was ecstatic. We did it, Sophia, he said, spinning me around his office, an office I'd helped pay for, furnished with equipment I'd helped buy. This is just the beginning. In 5 years, TIC is going to be the premier consulting firm in the Pacific Northwest. I felt a surge of pride that was quickly followed by a nagging question. Marcus, now that the business is profitable, shouldn't we formalize my role? Maybe put me on the payroll as CFO? His smile flickered, just for a second. Sophia, sweetheart, you know I appreciate everything you've done. But you're not really. I mean, you don't have experience in operations management. Your background is in financial analysis, not business consulting. I could learn, I said, trying to keep my voice light. I'm the one who helped you refine those projections, remember? I know this business inside and out. Of course you do, baby. And your input has been invaluable. But I think you're happiest doing what you do best, supporting the business from behind the scenes. Behind the scenes. Supporting. The language of someone whose contributions were appreciated but not essential. What about equity? I pressed. I invested my life savings, Marcus. Shouldn't I own part of the company? That's when his expression shifted to something I'd never seen before, irritation, quickly masked by condescension. Sophia, we've talked about this. You made a loan to help me get started. A very generous loan, and I'm grateful for it. But you're not a business partner. You're my girlfriend who believed in me enough to help me out. A loan. He was calling my $180,000 investment a loan. I never said anything about a loan, I said carefully. I said I wanted to invest. In our future. And you did. Look around, this business is our future. When we get married, when we buy a house, this is what's going to make it all possible. When we get married. It was the first time he'd mentioned marriage, and he'd done it in the context of explaining why I shouldn't expect to own part of the business I'd funded. I should have fought then. Should have demanded to see the incorporation papers, should have hired a lawyer, should have protected myself the way my father had taught me to protect myself. Instead, I convinced myself that Marcus was right. That supporting him was the same as supporting us. That his success would become our success, that his dreams were worth more than my security. I convinced myself that love meant trust, and trust meant not asking the hard questions. It was the most expensive mistake of my life. For the next 2 years, I watched Thompson Innovation Consulting grow from a one-man operation to a team of 12 consultants working out of a downtown office suite. I watched Marcus hire account managers and business development specialists and senior consultants, all while I continued working at Morrison & Partners, my salary helping to cover our living expenses so Marcus could reinvest every penny of profit back into the business. You're so supportive, his friends would say at the networking events and dinner parties that had become a regular part of our social life. It must be wonderful to have a partner who believes in your vision. Sophia's my rock, Marcus would reply, his arm around my waist, his smile warm and genuine. I couldn't have done any of this without her. But when potential clients asked about his team, when investors inquired about his leadership structure, when journalists interviewed him for articles about Seattle's rising young entrepreneurs, my name never came up. I was the girlfriend who'd helped out, not the woman who'd made it all possible. The breaking point came in year 3, at Thompson Innovation Consulting's annual holiday party. Marcus had rented out the top floor of one of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants, invited all his clients and employees and industry contacts. It was a celebration of everything the company had accomplished, a showcase of everything it had become. I stood at Marcus's side in a new dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, the first expensive dress I'd owned in years, justified by the importance of the event. Marcus looked stunning in his custom suit, his confidence magnetic as he worked the room, shaking hands and making connections. Ladies and gentlemen, he said when it came time for the toast, 3 years ago, Thompson Innovation Consulting was just an idea. A dream of what business consulting could become in the 21st century. The room fell silent, everyone turning to listen to the man who built something remarkable from nothing. Tonight, I want to thank all of you, our clients, our employees, our partners, for believing in that dream. But most of all, I want to thank the person who believed in it first. My heart swelled. This was it, the moment when Marcus would finally acknowledge what I contributed, would finally give me the recognition I'd been too polite to demand. 3 years ago, my father told me I was wasting my time chasing fantasies. He said I should join the family firm, do things the traditional way. But I knew that innovation requires risk, that breakthrough success demands breakthrough thinking. He paused, his eyes scanning the room, building drama. So I took every penny I had, borrowed against my future trust fund, and bet everything on this company. On all of you. And tonight, I can say with confidence that it was the best investment I ever made. The room erupted in applause. Marcus raised his champagne glass, his smile brilliant, his success complete. And I stood there in my expensive dress, watching the man I loved take credit for the risk I'd taken, rewrite the history I'd lived, erase the sacrifice I'd made. To Thompson Innovation Consulting, Marcus said, and to the power of believing in yourself. Everyone drank, everyone cheered, everyone celebrated the mythology Marcus had just created. Except me. I excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was beautifully dressed, professionally successful, romantically attached to one of Seattle's most promising young entrepreneurs. She was also completely invisible. When I returned to the party, Marcus was deep in conversation with a potential client, his charm in full effect. I touched his arm gently. "Marcus, can we talk for a minute?" He glanced at me with mild irritation. "Sophia, I'm in the middle of something important. Can it wait?" "It's important too. Just give me 10 minutes, okay? Mr. Patterson here is interested in our scalability consulting services." 10 minutes became 30, then an hour. I spent the rest of the party making small talk with employees I'd helped hire, in an office I'd helped lease, celebrating success I'd helped create, all while pretending I was just the supportive girlfriend tagging along. That night, in Marcus's apartment, I finally found the courage to say what I'd been thinking for months. "Marcus, I need to talk to you about my role in the company." He was loosening his tie, riding high on the evening's success. "What about it?" "I don't have a role in the company. That's the problem." Marcus paused, his fingers still on his tie. "Sophia, what are you talking about? You're incredibly important to TIC. You're my sounding board, my support system. I'm not on the payroll. I'm not listed as a founder. I don't own any equity. According to every legal document that matters, I don't exist." "That's not true. You're my partner in everything that matters." "Am I? Because tonight you told 200 people that you funded the startup with your own money and loans against your trust fund. You didn't mention the $180,000 I gave you." Marcus finished with his tie and turned to face me, his expression shifting to something I'd learned to recognize over the past 3 years, the look he got when he was about to explain why I was wrong about something I'd experienced firsthand. "Sophia, I didn't want to embarrass you. Talking about personal financial arrangements at a business event would have been inappropriate." "Embarrass me? Marcus, I invested my life savings in your company. That's not embarrassing, that's founding capital." "You gave me money to help me get started," he said slowly, like he was talking to a child. "That doesn't make you a founder. I'm the one who developed the business model, who built the client relationships, who manages the day-to-day operations. With money I provided. In an office I helped pay for. Using equipment I helped buy." Marcus sat down on the edge of the bed, his expression shifting from condescension to something that looked like pity. "Sophia, I think you're confused about how business partnerships work. Providing capital doesn't automatically entitle you to ownership or management roles. There's a difference between investing in someone and being their business partner." The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 years of watching him build success on my foundation, 3 years of supporting his dreams while deferring my own, 3 years of believing that his triumph would eventually become our triumph, and he thought I was confused about how partnerships work. "So what am I, then?" I asked quietly. "If I'm not a partner, not an investor, not a founder, what am I?" Marcus stood up and crossed to where I sat on the couch, his expression softening into the smile that had made me fall in love with him 5 years earlier. "You're the woman I love," he said, taking my hands in his. "You're the person who believed in me when no one else would. You're the reason I had the confidence to take this risk in the first place." He kissed my forehead gently. "Sophia, in 6 months I'll be 30. My trust fund will unlock, and I'll have access to serious money. We can get married, buy that house we've talked about, start our real life together. Isn't that worth more than having your name on some corporate documents? I stared at him, this man I'd loved and supported and sacrificed for, and realized he genuinely believed what he was saying. He genuinely thought that being his wife was more valuable than being his equal, that loving him was more important than being respected by him. He genuinely thought I should be grateful for the chance to disappear into his success rather than build my own. What if I don't want to wait 6 more months? I asked. What if I want to be recognized now for what I've contributed? Marcus's smile faltered, and for the first time in our relationship, I saw impatience flash across his features. Sophia, you're being unrealistic. You have a good job, a comfortable life, a boyfriend who loves you. Why are you trying to complicate things? Because I want more than comfortable, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. Because I want to build something of my own instead of just supporting someone else's dreams. That's when Marcus said the words that would haunt me for the next 5 years. Baby, you're not a builder. You're support staff. And there's nothing wrong with that, the world needs people who are good at supporting other people's visions. But let's be honest about what you bring to the table. Support staff. After everything I'd given, everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd made possible, he saw me as support staff. I should have left that night. Should have packed my things, moved out, demanded a reckoning. Should have hired a lawyer and fought for what was mine. Instead, I did what I'd been doing for 3 years. I convinced myself that Marcus didn't mean it the way it sounded, that he was just stressed from the pressure of running a growing business, that things would get better once we got married and our lives became more stable. I convinced myself that supporting someone else's dreams was the same as achieving my own. It would take 2 more years and 1 devastating conversation before I finally understood the difference. Chapter 2: The Erosion. The next 2 years passed in a haze of willful blindness. I threw myself into my job at Morrison & Partners, earning promotion to senior analyst and a salary bump that helped cover the increasing expenses of keeping up with Marcus's social circle. I told myself I was building my own career, creating my own success story parallel to his. But even as my professional life flourished, I felt myself shrinking in every other area. Marcus's business continued to grow, he hired more staff, landed bigger contracts, opened a second office in Portland. With each milestone, each success story written about Thompson Innovation Consulting in local business journals, I felt more like a footnote in someone else's narrative. The worst part was how good Marcus had become at making me complicit in my own invisibility. Sophia's so humble, he'd tell people at dinner parties. She never wants credit for anything. I'm always telling her she should be prouder of her contributions. Or, my girlfriend's the practical one in our relationship. She keeps me grounded, makes sure I don't get too caught up in the entrepreneurial ego trip. Each comment was delivered with genuine affection, accompanied by a squeeze of my hand or a kiss on my cheek. To everyone else, we looked like the perfect couple, the successful entrepreneur and his supportive, down-to-earth girlfriend. Marcus got to appear magnanimous for acknowledging my contributions while simultaneously defining those contributions as fundamentally different from his own achievements. I was the steady, sensible background to his brilliant, dynamic foreground. The truly insidious part was that Marcus seemed to genuinely believe this narrative. He created a version of our story where his success was self-made and my support was lovely but ultimately incidental. In his mind, he was being generous by crediting me at all. "You know what I love about you?" he said one evening as we prepared for yet another networking event. "You're not like these other entrepreneur wives who need to be involved in everything. You understand that we each have our own strengths." Entrepreneur wives. Not entrepreneur partners. Not fellow business builders. Wives whose value came from knowing their place. I adjusted my jewelry in the mirror, watching him straighten his tie with the unconscious confidence of a man who'd never doubted his right to take up space in the world. "Marcus," I said carefully, "what if I wanted to be more involved? What if I had ideas for the business?" He glanced at me in the mirror, his expression patient but slightly exasperated. "Sophia, we've talked about this. Tick is in a really delicate growth phase right now. I can't afford to experiment with untested management approaches." "I'm not untested. I've been doing financial analysis for 8 years. Financial analysis for an investment firm is completely different from operational consulting for startups. They're not related skill sets. The dismissal was so automatic, so complete, that I knew he'd given this response before, probably to himself, every time the question of my involvement came up in his mind. How do you know they're not related if you've never given me a chance to try? Marcus stopped adjusting his tie and turned to look at me directly. Sophia, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but the truth is that TIC's success comes from having a unified vision and consistent execution. I can't have multiple people pulling the company in different directions based on different perspectives. What if my perspective was valuable? What if it could make the company stronger? Baby, Marcus said, crossing to where I stood and putting his hands on my shoulders, your perspective is valuable. To me, personally. You're my sounding board, my reality check. But that's different from being a decision maker. I stared at him, this man I'd loved for 5 years, funded for 3, and supported through every challenge and triumph he'd faced. Why is it different? I asked. Because I'm the one who's responsible for the results. If TIC fails, it's my reputation on the line, my career that's over. I can't share that responsibility with someone who doesn't have the same expertise or the same stake in the outcome. The same stake in the outcome. As if my $180,000 investment, the money that had made everything else possible, didn't constitute a stake. That night, at the networking event, I found myself really listening to the conversations around me for the first time in years. I heard Marcus tell the same stories I'd heard dozens of times, how he'd identified the gap in the market, how he'd taken the risk to start his own firm, how he'd built TIC through pure determination and innovative thinking. The hardest part was the beginning, he told a group of potential clients. I was young, unproven, working out of my apartment with no safety net. Everything I had was on the line. Everything he had. Not everything we had. Not the money I'd saved for 10 years, the security I'd sacrificed, the future I'd gambled on his vision. Everything he had. I excused myself to get another drink and found myself at the bar next to Sarah Chen, a woman I'd met at several of these events. Sarah had started her own marketing consultancy around the same time Marcus launched TIC. How's business? I asked, making polite conversation. Exhausting, Sarah laughed. But good. We just landed our biggest contract yet, a tech company that wants us to manage their entire brand launch. It's terrifying and exciting at the same time. That sounds amazing. How did you get started? Did you have investors? Sarah's expression shifted slightly. That's always the million-dollar question, isn't it? I was lucky, I had some savings, and my husband believed in the idea enough to help with startup costs. But the real challenge wasn't money, it was proving myself. Convincing clients that a 30-year-old woman could deliver the same results as the established firms. Your husband helped with startup costs? He's listed as co-founder and CFO. Handles all the financial side while I focus on creative and client relations. It works perfectly, we each have our areas of expertise, but we're partners in everything. Partners in everything. The phrase hit me like a revelation. That must be nice, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Having someone who really understands the business. It is. Scary sometimes, we're risking everything together, but there's something powerful about building something as a team. About knowing that whatever happens, we're in it together. I nodded and smiled and made appropriate responses, but inside I was reeling. Sarah and her husband had created exactly what I thought Marcus and I were building, a true partnership where both people's contributions were recognized and valued. The difference was that Sarah's husband had never made her feel like she should be grateful for the chance to support his dreams. When we got home that night, I tried one more time. Marcus, I met someone interesting tonight. Sarah Chen, she runs Chen Marketing Solutions? Oh yeah, I know Sarah. Solid operation, good reputation. She told me her husband is listed as co-founder. He helped with startup capital and handles the financial side. Marcus was scrolling through emails on his phone, only half listening. That's nice for them. It made me think about our situation. About whether there might be a role for me at TIC that would utilize my financial background. Marcus looked up from his phone, and I saw that familiar flash of irritation cross his features. Sophia, we've been over this. Tick has a perfectly good accountant. We don't need another financial person. I'm not talking about bookkeeping. I'm talking about strategic financial planning, investment analysis, growth modeling. I handle all the strategic planning, Marcus interrupted. That's what CEOs do. But what if we worked on it together? What if? Sophia, stop. The sharpness in his voice made me freeze. I'm sorry, he said, moderating his tone. I didn't mean to snap. But this conversation is becoming repetitive, and frankly, it's starting to feel like you don't trust my judgment. It's not about trust. It's about partnership. We are partners. In life, in our future, in everything that matters. But Tick is my business. I built it, I run it, and I make the decisions about how it operates. With my money. The words slipped out before I could stop them, hanging in the air between us like an accusation. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, his expression cycling through surprise, anger, and something that looked like disgust. Is that what this is about? He asked quietly. You want credit for writing a check? The contempt in his voice was unmistakable. Writing a check. As if my $180,000 investment, my years of sacrifice, my unwavering support were nothing more than a financial transaction. It wasn't just a check, Marcus. It was everything I had. And I've told you how grateful I am for that. But gratitude doesn't equal ownership, Sophia. It doesn't give you the right to second-guess my business decisions or demand a role you're not qualified for. Not qualified for. The phrase echoed in my head as I stared at this man I'd loved and supported and believed in for 5 years. What would qualify me? I asked quietly. What would I need to do to earn the right to be involved in the business I helped create? Marcus rubbed his forehead like I was giving him a headache. Sophia, this isn't about qualifications. It's about understanding your role in our relationship. You're amazing at what you do, you're a talented analyst, a loving girlfriend, a supportive partner. But you're not an entrepreneur. You're not a risk taker. You're not built for the kind of high-pressure, high-stakes environment that Tick operates in. Each word was like a small knife, cutting away at my sense of self, my understanding of my own capabilities. How do you know what I'm built for if you've never given me a chance to show you? Because I know you, Marcus said, his voice taking on that patient, condescending tone I'd come to hate. I know that you like stability, security, predictable outcomes. There's nothing wrong with that, the world needs people like you. But it's not the same as being an entrepreneur. People like you. As if I belonged to some lesser category of human, some support class designed to enable the real achievers. That night, I lay awake in Marcus's bed, staring at the ceiling and finally allowing myself to see our relationship clearly. For 5 years, I'd been in love with the idea of us, the brilliant entrepreneur and his devoted partner, building a life and a legacy together. But the reality was that Marcus had built his legacy on top of my sacrifice, using my money and my support to create something that belonged entirely to him. And the most devastating part was that he genuinely didn't see anything wrong with that arrangement. In his mind, he was the visionary and I was the funding source. He was the builder and I was the foundation, invisible, taken for granted, essential but unacknowledged. The worst part was how long I'd participated in my own erasure, how eagerly I'd accepted the role of supporting character in someone else's story. But that night, something shifted. Maybe it was the conversation with Sarah Chen, seeing what real partnership looked like. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of 5 years' worth of small dismissals and casual diminishments. Maybe it was simply that I'd finally reached my limit. Whatever it was, I started planning my exit. Not dramatically, not all at once. I was too practical for that, too careful. But I began quietly reclaiming pieces of myself that I'd given away without even realizing it. I started by opening my own bank account, something I hadn't had since moving in with Marcus 3 years earlier. Just a small checking account at a different bank, funded with money from freelance financial consulting work I began taking on weekends. I started saying no to some of the social events that had become such a central part of our life, claiming work obligations or family commitments. I needed space to think, distance from the constant performance of being Marcus's supportive girlfriend. Most importantly, I started documenting everything. Every conversation about my investment, every email about business expenses I covered, every text message where Marcus had asked for my input on tick-related decisions. I didn't know what I was building toward, but I knew I needed evidence of my contributions, proof that I'd been more than just a supportive bystander. It took 6 months of careful preparation before I was ready for the conversation that would change everything. 6 months of watching Marcus take credit for achievements I'd helped create, of listening to him explain why I wasn't qualified for roles in the business I'd funded, of feeling myself become smaller and smaller in my own life. 6 months of realizing that I'd spent 5 years loving someone who saw me as useful rather than valuable, supportive rather than essential, grateful rather than equal. The breaking point came, ironically, at Tick's 5th anniversary celebration. Chapter 3, The Breaking Point. Marcus had outdone himself for Thompson Innovation Consulting's 5th anniversary party. He'd rented the ballroom at the Four Seasons, hired a jazz quartet, and invited 300 of Seattle's most influential business leaders. The invitation list read like a who's who of the tech and consulting world, exactly the kind of event that would cement Tick's reputation as a major player in the Pacific Northwest business community. I stood at Marcus's side in a navy blue cocktail dress, playing the role I'd perfected over 5 years, the elegant, supportive girlfriend who made just enough conversation to be charming without ever stealing focus from the main attraction. The evening began with cocktails and networking, the kind of strategic socializing that Marcus excelled at. I watched him work the room with admiration that was only slightly tinged with resentment. He was genuinely gifted at this, reading people, identifying their needs, positioning Tick as the solution to problems they didn't even know they had. "Sophia!" A familiar voice called out across the crowded ballroom. I turned to see Janet Morrison, my former boss from Morrison and Partners, making her way toward me with a warm smile. "Janet! I didn't expect to see you here." "Marcus sent me an invitation," she said, giving me a hug. "I wouldn't miss celebrating one of Seattle's most impressive startup success stories." We chatted for a few minutes about my current work, her family, the changes in the financial sector. Then Janet said something that made my stomach clench. "You know, I've always admired how you and Marcus built Tick together. It takes real courage for a couple to risk everything on a shared vision." Built Tick together. If only Janet knew how far from the truth that was. "Marcus is definitely the visionary," I said carefully. "I just provided some support along the way." Janet looked at me with confusion. "Support? Sophia, you were one of my best analysts. I remember you taking that sabbatical 5 years ago to focus on the startup launch. You said you and Marcus were going into business together." My blood turned cold. I had taken a sabbatical, 3 months of unpaid leave when Tick was getting off the ground, when Marcus needed help with business plan refinement, financial projections, and client presentations. I told Janet I was pursuing an entrepreneurial opportunity with my boyfriend. "You said you were putting your career on hold to build something amazing together," Janet continued. "I was so impressed by your willingness to take that risk." Risk? I'd taken all the financial risk, all the career risk, all the personal risk. But somehow, 5 years later, Marcus had convinced everyone, including me, most of the time, that the risk had been entirely his. Things evolved, I managed to say. Marcus turned out to be better suited for the operational side. "Well, whatever your role, you should be incredibly proud. Tick's growth trajectory has been remarkable." Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at my side, his arm sliding around my waist with practiced possessiveness. "Janet! So glad you could make it. Sophia and I were just talking about how surreal this all feels." "I was telling Sophia how impressed I am with what you two have built," Janet said. 5 years ago, she was one of my most promising analysts, and now she's part of one of Seattle's most successful consulting firms. Marcus's smile didn't waver, but I felt his grip tighten slightly on my waist. "Sophia's been incredible," he said smoothly. "I couldn't have done any of this without her support." Support. Always support, never partnership, never collaboration, never shared achievement. "I should let you two get back to your guests," Janet said. "But Sophia, if you ever decide to get back into traditional financial analysis, give me a call. I'd hire you back in a heartbeat." After Janet walked away, Marcus turned to me with barely concealed irritation. What was that about? He asked quietly. What about? You told your old boss that we were starting a business together? The accusation in his voice made my cheeks burn. 5 years ago, I thought we were. Sophia, we've talked about this. You invested in my business. That doesn't make you a co-founder. I stared at him, this man who had systematically rewritten our history to erase my contributions, and felt something snap inside me. Excuse me, I said, pulling away from his arm. I need some air. I made my way to the hotel's rooftop terrace, grateful for the cool Seattle evening and the relative quiet. Below me, the city sparkled with possibilities, all the lives being lived, the dreams being pursued, the chances being taken by people brave enough to bet on themselves. When had I stopped being brave enough to bet on myself? I was so lost in thought that I didn't hear footsteps until someone cleared their throat behind me. Mind if I join you? I turned to see David Kim, one of Tick's early clients who'd become something of a friend over the years. His tech startup had gone public 18 months ago, making him one of Seattle's youngest multimillionaires. Of course, I said, making room at the railing. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out over the city. Hell of a party, David said finally. Marcus knows how to celebrate. He does. Though I have to say, I'm a little surprised. About what? David glanced at me sideways. About the story he told during his speech. My heart started racing. What do you mean? The whole narrative about starting with nothing, bootstrapping the business, taking enormous personal financial risks. It's not exactly how I remember the early days. I turned to face him fully. What do you remember? I remember meeting with you both in that tiny office space you guys shared. I remember you presenting the financial projections, walking me through the business model, explaining how Tick's approach would be different from traditional consulting firms. My mouth went dry. I'd forgotten that David had been there for some of those early meetings, back when Marcus still acknowledged my contributions publicly. I remember Marcus telling me that Tick was a partnership, that you were the financial brains behind the operation while he handled business development. A partnership. Marcus had called us a partnership when he needed my expertise to close deals. Things change, I said weakly. Do they? David asked. Or do people just rewrite history to fit the story they want to tell about themselves? Before I could respond, Marcus appeared in the doorway to the terrace. There you are, he said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. People are asking for you inside. David gave me a meaningful look. Think about what I said, Sophia. Some stories are too important to let other people tell wrong. After David left, Marcus and I stood alone on the terrace. The city lights blurred slightly as unexpected tears filled my eyes. Sophia, what's wrong? Marcus asked, his voice genuinely concerned. You've been acting strange all evening. Have I? Or have I been acting like myself for the first time in years? Marcus frowned. I don't understand. Marcus, what did you tell people about how Tick started? I told them the truth. That I saw an opportunity in the market, developed a business plan, and took the risk to start my own firm. What about my investment? What about the 3 months I took off work to help you launch? What about all the early client meetings where I presented our financial analysis? Marcus's expression shifted to that patient, condescending look I'd grown to hate. Sophia, we've been over this. Yes, you provided some funding to help me get started. Yes, you helped with some early presentations. But that doesn't make you a co-founder. Why not? Because starting a business is about more than money. It's about vision, leadership, the ability to make hard decisions under pressure. It's about taking responsibility for success or failure. I took responsibility. I risked everything I had. You wrote a check, Sophia. I built a company. The dismissal was so complete, so casual, that it took my breath away. 5 years of my life, $180,000 of my money, countless hours of my expertise, reduced to writing a check. Marcus, I said quietly, I need you to hear something, and I need you to really listen. He crossed his arms, his body language already defensive. 5 years ago, I gave you every penny I had because I believed in your vision. But more than that, I believed in us. I thought we were building something together. We were. Let me finish. The steel in my voice surprised both of us. For 5 years, I've watched you take credit for risks I helped you take, for successes I helped you achieve, for a business I helped you build. I've listened to you explain to everyone, including me, why my contributions don't count, why my expertise isn't valuable, why my partnership isn't real. Marcus opened his mouth to interrupt, but I held up my hand. I've supported your dreams, celebrated your victories, and absorbed your failures as if they were my own. I've made myself smaller and smaller so you could shine brighter and brighter. And I told myself it was love. It is love. No, Marcus. Love doesn't require one person to disappear so the other can exist. Love doesn't mean convincing someone that their contributions don't matter. Love doesn't mean rewriting history to make yourself the hero of someone else's sacrifice. Marcus stared at me, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that looked like panic. Sophia, you're being dramatic. We're at my company's anniversary party, for God's sake. Can we please discuss this at home? Your company. Even now, even after everything I've said, it's still your company. Because it is my company. The words exploded out of him with 5 years' worth of suppressed frustration. I'm the one who developed the business model. I'm the one who built the client relationships. I'm the one who manages the day-to-day operations. I'm the one who takes responsibility when things go wrong. He was breathing hard now, his careful composure finally cracking. You gave me money, Sophia. Money that I'm grateful for, that I'll always be grateful for. But money doesn't make you an entrepreneur. It doesn't give you the right to claim credit for something you didn't build. I didn't just give you money, I said, my voice deadly calm. I gave you everything. My savings, my time, my expertise, my connections, my unwavering support for 5 years. I gave you the foundation that made everything else possible. And I appreciate that. Appreciate it? I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. Marcus, you don't appreciate it. You've forgotten it. You've convinced yourself that your success is entirely self-made, that my contributions were just. What did you call it? Support? Marcus ran his hands through his hair, looking genuinely confused by my anger. Sophia, I don't understand why you're so upset about this. We have a good life together. We're successful, we're happy, we're planning a future. Whose future? I interrupted. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I'm planning to be an accessory to your life rather than the architect of my own. That's not fair. Isn't it? Marcus, when was the last time you asked me about my dreams? My goals? My vision for our future that didn't revolve around supporting your ambitions? Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling to remember. You can't even think of one time, can you? Sophia, you've never expressed interest in starting your own business. You've never talked about wanting something different. Because every time I've tried, you've explained to me why I'm not qualified, why it wouldn't work, why I should be satisfied with what I have. I took a deep breath, gathering courage for what I needed to say next. Marcus, I want you to answer one question honestly. Do you see me as your equal? The pause before his answer told me everything I needed to know. Sophia, you're comparing apples to oranges. We have different strengths, different roles. That's not what I asked. Do you see me as your equal? As someone whose intelligence, whose contributions, whose dreams matter as much as yours? Another pause, longer this time. I think you're taking this equality thing too far, Marcus said finally. Not everyone can be the CEO, Sophia. Not everyone is cut out to be the leader. Some people are better suited to supportive roles. Some people. As if I were just some random person rather than the woman who'd made his success possible. And you think I'm one of those people? I think you're incredibly talented at what you do. I think you're amazing at analysis, at organization, at providing stability and support. But that's different from being an entrepreneur. How do you know I'm not cut out to be an entrepreneur if you've never given me the chance to try? Marcus's expression shifted to something I'd never seen before, contempt mixed with pity. Because entrepreneurs don't need someone else's permission to take risks, Sophia. They don't wait for opportunities to be handed to them. They create their own opportunities. The words hit me like a physical blow. After 5 years of systematically convincing me that I wasn't qualified for leadership, after 5 years of explaining why my expertise didn't matter, after 5 years of making me feel grateful for scraps of recognition, he was now using my learned helplessness as evidence of my natural limitations. "You're right," I said quietly. Marcus looked surprised by my agreement. "I am?" "You're absolutely right. Entrepreneurs don't wait for permission. They don't ask for opportunities to be handed to them." I smiled, and something in my expression must have alarmed him because his face went pale. "They take what's theirs." Before Marcus could respond, I turned and walked back into the ballroom, leaving him standing alone on the terrace. The party was in full swing, 300 of Seattle's most influential people celebrating Marcus's vision, his leadership, his success. I moved through the crowd with purpose, no longer playing the role of supportive girlfriend but claiming space as myself for the first time in years. I found what I was looking for near the bar: James Patterson, TIC's biggest client and one of Seattle's most respected tech investors. "Mr. Patterson," I said, approaching him with the confidence I'd forgotten I possessed. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Sophia Martinez." "Of course. Marcus's better half. Wonderful party." "Thank you. I was wondering if I could have a word with you about a business opportunity." James raised his eyebrows with interest. "Oh? Are you and Marcus expanding TIC services?" "Actually, I'm exploring options for my own venture. I understand you're always looking for innovative investment opportunities?" For the next 20 minutes, I laid out a business plan I'd been developing in secret for the past 6 months. A financial consulting firm focused specifically on helping women entrepreneurs access capital and scale their businesses. I had the expertise, the connections, and, thanks to my weekend freelance work, enough startup capital to begin operations immediately. James listened intently, asking sharp questions that I answered with the analytical precision I'd honed over 8 years in the financial sector. "This is impressive, Sophia," he said when I finished. "Have you discussed this with Marcus? It seems like there could be some synergies with TIC services." "Marcus and I have very different views on my entrepreneurial capabilities," I said diplomatically. "I think it's time I explored them independently." James nodded slowly, understanding more than I'd explicitly said. "Well, I'd love to continue this conversation in a more formal setting. Why don't you call my office next week and we'll set up a proper meeting?" As James handed me his business card, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 5 years: the thrill of being taken seriously as a businessperson rather than dismissed as support staff. I spent the rest of the evening networking with my own agenda for the first time, introducing myself as a financial consultant rather than Marcus's girlfriend, discussing business ideas rather than playing the role of charming accessory. It felt like coming back to life. Marcus found me an hour later, his face tight with barely controlled anger. "What the hell was that about?" he hissed, pulling me aside. What about?" "James Patterson just congratulated me on my girlfriend's impressive business acumen. He said you pitched him some kind of consulting firm?" "I did." "Sophia, what are you doing? You can't just network my clients for your own business ideas." "Why not? You've been using my investment for your business ideas for 5 years." Marcus looked around nervously, clearly aware that we were in public and people were starting to notice our tense conversation. "We need to go home. Now." "I'm not ready to leave." "Sophia, I'm not asking." The command in his voice, the assumption that he could control my movements, my choices, my conversations, it crystallized everything I'd been feeling for months. "Actually, Marcus, you are asking. Because you can't make me do anything." I smiled at him, the same polite smile I'd been wearing for 5 years, but with steel underneath it now. "I'm going to finish my conversations here. You're welcome to stay or go as you prefer. But you don't get to tell me what to do anymore." Marcus stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Sophia, what has gotten into you?" "Clarity," I said simply. That night, I went home to Marcus's apartment for the last time. While he showered off the evening stress, I packed a suitcase with essentials and left a note on his pillow. The note was simple: "I'm staying at a hotel tonight. We need to talk tomorrow about dividing our assets and ending our relationship." Also, I'll be needing documentation of my $180,000 investment in TIC for my lawyer. Sophia. I checked into a downtown hotel and called my brother Carlos, waking him up at midnight to tell him I was finally leaving Marcus. Jesus, Sophia, what took you so long? Was his response. I was waiting for permission, I said, and started laughing through my tears. It had taken me 5 years to realize that the only person who could give me permission to value myself was me. Chapter 4, The Reckoning. I woke up in that hotel room the next morning feeling like I'd shed a skin I didn't even know I'd been wearing. For the first time in years, I had no agenda except my own, no one to accommodate except myself. My phone had been buzzing all night with calls and texts from Marcus, ranging from confused to angry to pleading. I turned it off after midnight and slept better than I had in months. At 9 a.m., I turned it back on and found 17 missed calls and 23 text messages. The progression was predictable. Sophia, what the hell is going on? Call me back. This is ridiculous. Come home so we can talk like adults. I don't understand why you're being so dramatic about this. Baby, please. Whatever I said to upset you, I'm sorry. We can work this out. Sophia, you're scaring me. At least let me know you're safe. I called him back at exactly 10 a.m. Jesus Christ, Sophia, where are you? I've been worried sick. I'm fine, Marcus. I told you I was staying at a hotel. Which hotel? I'm coming to get you. No, you're not. We're going to handle this like the business partners we should have been. Meet me at Sullivan & Associates at 2 p.m. Sullivan & Associates? The law firm? Sophia, what the hell? 2 p.m., Marcus. Don't be late. I hung up before he could argue. I'd spent the early morning hours researching business attorneys and had chosen Rebecca Sullivan based on her reputation for handling partnership disputes and investment recovery cases. Her initial consultation fee was steep, but I decided it was worth every penny to have professional representation. Ms. Martinez, Rebecca said when I arrived at her office, tell me about your situation. I laid out the entire story, the $180,000 investment, the business formation documents I'd signed without reading carefully, the 5 years of contributions that had been systematically erased from TIC's official history. Rebecca listened with the focused attention of someone who'd heard variations of this story before. Do you have documentation of your financial investment? She asked. I handed her copies of the cashier's check, bank transfer records, and every email where Marcus had acknowledged my funding. What about documentation of your operational contributions? That's where it gets complicated, I admitted. Marcus was very careful to keep my involvement informal. But I have emails where he asked for my input on business decisions, photos from client meetings where I presented financial analysis, and several witnesses who can testify to my role in the early days. Rebecca nodded grimly. Classic case of informal partnership. Legally complex, but not impossible to resolve. She explained my options. I could sue for partnership recognition and a share of the business, or I could demand repayment of my investment with interest and damages. Either path would be expensive and time-consuming, with no guarantee of success. There's a third option, Rebecca said. Depending on how motivated Mr. Thompson is to avoid litigation, we might be able to negotiate a settlement that gives you what you deserve without going to court. At 2 p.m. sharp, Marcus arrived at the law office looking like he'd been hit by a truck. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his confident demeanor replaced by something that looked like panic. Sophia, what are we doing here? He asked as we sat down in Rebecca's conference room. Whatever's wrong, we can fix it together. We don't need lawyers. Actually, we do, I said calmly. Because for 5 years, you've convinced me that my contributions to TIC don't matter legally. Now I'm going to find out if you're right. Rebecca opened a folder and placed several documents on the table. Mr. Thompson, my client is seeking recognition as a founding partner of Thompson Innovation Consulting, based on her substantial financial investment and operational contributions to the business. Marcus's face went white. That's ridiculous. Sophia gave me a loan to help with startup costs. That doesn't make her a partner. A loan? Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Do you have a promissory note? A repayment schedule? Any documentation that establishes this as a loan rather than an investment? Marcus looked at me desperately. Sophia, tell her. You know it wasn't a formal business arrangement. We were in a relationship. You were helping me out. I was investing in what I believe was our shared future, I said. But apparently, we had very different understandings of what that meant. Rebecca spread out more documents, printouts of emails, bank records, witness statements from early clients who remembered my involvement. Mr. Thompson, the evidence suggests that Ms. Martinez was instrumental in founding and developing TIC. She provided 100% of the initial capital, contributed significantly to early business development, and was actively involved in client relations during the startup phase. But she's not listed as a founder in the incorporation documents, Marcus said, grasping for any legal foothold. No, she's not. Which raises interesting questions about whether those documents accurately reflect the reality of the business relationship. Marcus turned to me, his expression shifting from panic to anger. Sophia, this is insane. You can't just decide 5 years later that you want to be a business owner. You made a choice to support my dream instead of pursuing your own. Did I make that choice? Or did you make it for me by convincing me I wasn't capable of anything else? Nobody forced you to give me that money. You're right. Nobody forced me. I chose to invest in us, to believe in our partnership, to trust that my contributions would be valued and recognized. I leaned forward, looking him directly in the eye. But you've spent 5 years systematically erasing my role in TIC's success. You've rewritten our history to make yourself the sole creator of something we built together. You've convinced everyone, including me, for a while, that my investment was charity rather than partnership. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing but now recognized as manipulation. Sophia, please. Think about what you're doing. TIC is my life's work. You can't just take that away from me. I'm not trying to take anything away from you. I'm trying to get recognition for what I put in. Rebecca placed another document on the table. Mr. Thompson, we're prepared to offer a settlement. Ms. Martinez will accept a 30% ownership stake in TIC, retroactive to the founding date, plus compensation for 5 years of unrecognized contributions. 30%? Marcus's voice cracked. That's insane. She didn't. She wasn't. She provided 100% of the startup capital and significant operational contributions during the critical early years, Rebecca said matter-of-factly. 30% is actually quite generous, considering she could make a case for 50% ownership. Marcus looked at me like I'd betrayed him in the most fundamental way possible. Sophia, you can't be serious about this. After everything we've been through together, after everything I've given you. What have you given me, Marcus? The question stopped him cold. What exactly have you given me? Because from where I'm sitting, I gave you everything, my money, my time, my expertise, my unwavering support, and you gave me a front row seat to watch someone else live my dream. I gave you love. No. You gave me the opportunity to make myself useful to you. That's not the same thing as love. Marcus stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact moment when he stopped seeing me as the supportive girlfriend he could manage and started seeing me as a threat he needed to destroy. Fine, he said, his voice turning cold. You want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Sophia, you think you deserve credit for TIC's success? You think you were some kind of founding partner? Let me tell you what you actually were. His voice was rising now, 5 years of suppressed resentment finally spilling over. You were dead weight. A hanger-on who wrote a check and then spent 5 years convincing yourself that made you important. You want to know why I never made you a partner? Because you don't have what it takes. You're not a leader, you're not a visionary, and you're sure as hell not an entrepreneur. Each word was designed to cut, to reduce me back to the insecure woman who'd once been grateful for his attention. You know what entrepreneurs do, Sophia? They take risks with their own money, not someone else's. They build businesses through vision and leadership, not by riding someone else's coattails. They earn their success instead of trying to claim credit for work they didn't do. He leaned across the table, his face twisted with contempt. Tick is successful because of my vision, my leadership, my relationships, my expertise. You were just along for the ride, and now you want a participation trophy for showing up. The attack was so vicious, so calculated, that for a moment I felt myself shrinking back into the woman I'd been for 5 years, the woman who'd believed that Marcus's success was more important than her own dignity. But only for a moment. Then I smiled. You're absolutely right, Marcus. Entrepreneurs do take risks with their own money. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a document I'd prepared that morning. Which is why I'm withdrawing my investment in Tick, effective immediately. Marcus's face went from red to white in seconds. What? $180,000, plus 5 years of compound interest at the current market rate, plus damages for the opportunity cost of having my capital tied up in an investment that was misrepresented to me. I slid the document across the table to Rebecca, who nodded approvingly. According to my calculations, Tick owes me approximately $340,000. Payable within 30 days. Marcus grabbed the document, his hands shaking as he read it. Sophia, you can't do this. Tick doesn't have that kind of liquid capital. Most of our assets are tied up in equipment, office leases, employee contracts. Then I guess you'll need to figure out how to raise the money, I said calmly. Maybe you can take out a loan against your trust fund. Marcus looked at Rebecca desperately. She can't just demand her money back like this. There are legal processes, contractual obligations. Actually, Rebecca said, given that there was no formal partnership agreement and no promissory note establishing this as a loan, Ms. Martinez is well within her rights to treat this as an investment that was obtained under false pretenses. False pretenses? You accepted her money under the representation that she would be a partner in the business. When that partnership was not formalized and her contributions were subsequently minimized, it constitutes a material misrepresentation of the investment terms. Marcus stared at me across the table, and I saw him finally understand what was happening. For 5 years, he'd used my money to build his empire while keeping me powerless. Now I was taking back not just my investment, but my power. Sophia, please, he said, his voice breaking. Don't do this. We can work something out. We can make you a partner, give you the recognition you deserve. 5 minutes ago, I was dead weight who didn't deserve credit for anything, I reminded him. What changed? Marcus's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I'll tell you what changed, I continued. 5 minutes ago, you thought you could intimidate me into backing down. You thought you could use the same tactics you've been using for 5 years to make me feel small and grateful and worthless. I stood up, gathering my papers with deliberate calm. But here's the thing about entrepreneurs, Marcus, they don't let other people define their worth. They don't accept other people's limitations. And they definitely don't let anyone convince them they should be grateful for scraps when they deserve the whole feast. I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at him. You were right about one thing, entrepreneurs do create their own opportunities. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Marcus called my name as I left the conference room, but I didn't look back. 2 weeks later, Tick was forced to take out an emergency loan to pay my settlement. The financial strain caused enough cash flow problems that Marcus had to lay off 3 employees and cancel the Portland office expansion he'd been planning. I used the settlement money to launch Martinez Financial Consulting, focusing on helping women entrepreneurs access capital and build sustainable businesses. Within 6 months, I had 12 clients and a waiting list. Within a year, I was making more money than I'd ever made working for someone else. Within 2 years, my firm was generating enough revenue that Marcus's old clients started approaching me about switching to my services. 3 years after that devastating conversation in Rebecca's office, I ran into Marcus at a networking event. He looked older, tired, diminished somehow. Tick was still operating, but it had never fully recovered from the financial hit of my settlement. Sophia, he said awkwardly. You look successful. I am successful, I said simply. I heard about your firm. Very impressive. Thank you. We stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Marcus spoke again. I want you to know that I've thought a lot about what happened between us. About the things I said. I waited, curious to see if he'd actually learn anything from our experience. I was angry, he continued. I felt like you were trying to take away something I'd worked so hard to build. But I realize now that maybe I didn't give you enough credit for your contributions. Maybe. Even in his attempted apology, Marcus couldn't fully acknowledge what he'd done. Marcus, I said gently, the problem was never that you didn't give me enough credit. The problem was that you convinced me I didn't deserve any credit at all. He winced, and I almost felt sorry for him. For 5 years, you made me believe that supporting your dreams was more valuable than pursuing my own. You made me grateful for invisibility, convinced me that being useful was the same as being loved. I smiled, and there was no anger in it anymore, just clarity. But you taught me something important, even if you didn't mean to. You taught me the difference between being someone's partner and being someone's accessory. And for that lesson, I'll always be grateful. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but I was already walking away. Because entrepreneurs don't wait for other people's permission to value themselves. They don't need other people's approval to pursue their dreams. And they definitely don't waste time explaining their worth to people who've already proven they don't understand it. I walked out of that networking event and into my own life, the life I'd been too scared to claim for 31 years, the life I'd almost let someone else convince me I didn't deserve. The life that had been waiting for me all along, on the other side of my fear. Epilogue, 5 years later. I'm writing this from my corner office overlooking Elliott Bay, where Martinez Financial Consulting now occupies an entire floor of downtown Seattle's newest business building. Through my window, I can see the Four Seasons Hotel where Marcus celebrated TIC's 5th anniversary, the night I finally found the courage to bet on myself. This morning, I signed the papers to acquire Thompson Innovation Consulting. Marcus approached me 6 months ago, hat in hand, asking if MFC would be interested in a merger. TIC had been struggling since the recession, losing clients to more innovative firms, hemorrhaging money as Marcus tried to maintain the lifestyle he built during the company's early success. I offered to buy him out instead. You want to buy my company? He'd asked, stunned. I want to buy the company I helped create, I corrected. The one that was built on my investment, my expertise, and my contributions that you spent so many years claiming didn't matter. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Today, TIC's 12 remaining employees became part of the MFC family. I kept them all, they're talented people who deserve better leadership than Marcus had provided. I suspect they'll flourish under a management structure that values collaboration over ego. Marcus took his buyout check and moved to Portland, where he's supposedly starting a new consulting firm focused on small business development. I wish him well, genuinely. Our relationship taught me that resentment is just another cage, and I've spent too many years breaking free from cages to build new ones. My assistant buzzed me an hour ago to let me know that a reporter from Seattle Business Journal wants to interview me about the acquisition. The article will probably focus on the unusual nature of the deal. Successful entrepreneur buys out the company she originally helped fund. I'll do the interview, because women need to see stories about taking back their power, about refusing to accept other people's definitions of their worth, about the radical act of betting on yourself when everyone else has convinced you you're not worth the risk. But I won't spend much time talking about Marcus or TIC or the 5 years I spent making myself smaller so someone else could shine brighter. That's not my story anymore. My story is about the Martinez Financial Consulting clients who've raised over $50 million in funding because someone believed in their vision when no one else would. It's about the women who've launched successful businesses because someone taught.